Hey friends, today we're going to look at a study from 2016. It's called Life Adverse Experiences in Relation with Obesity and Binge Eating Disorder. It came out in the Journal of Behavioral Addictions. And what this study looks at is the connection between body fat and trauma. So the cliff notes, if you want to just get this far in the video, is that adverse experiences in a person's life, trauma, are connected to the development of body fat. So this is a meta study, and what that means is that they looked at 70 studies that other people had already performed. And in those total 70 studies, they had 306,583 participants. So of the 70 studies, 53 of the studies looked at adverse life experience and the connection to obesity. So that's all different types of adversity that people have faced, from abuse to death to war, neglect, car accidents, all kinds of different types of adverse life experiences, and how they are connected to the development of obesity after the experience. It could be years later. 7 of the studies looked at PTSD symptoms in particular, and the symptoms and their relationship to obesity. And 10 of the studies looked at adverse life experiences in binge eating disorder. So some previous research has drawn a clear connection between binge eating and the development of obesity. So in addition, the study looked at mediating factors, and these are possible causes for the connection between trauma and body fat. So one of the causes they looked at is that the PTSD symptoms themselves is driving this process. So with the PTSD symptoms, that could be nightmares, depersonalization, panic, avoiding triggering stimulus. The PTSD symptoms, they activate the HPA axis. That's the hippocampus pituitary adrenal axis. And this is the vigilance, fight or flight response that our body is able to mount. So with the PTSD symptoms comes the hyperactivation of the HPA axis. That leads to an increase in peripheral cortisol. So if you remember, cortisol is kind of like our awake, alert, stress hormone. So we get an increase in peripheral cortisol in our body, in our muscles, and our tissues with the activation of the HPA axis. And the increase in peripheral cortisol then leads to an accumulation of adipose or fatty tissues in the body. So that's one of the possible mediating factors here. We also have negative emotional states. So just feeling bad or sad or angry can all be viewed as negative emotional states. So when a negative emotional state occurs, particularly in people who have trauma or PTSD, a dissociation can happen. So dissociation is when we shift out of our prefrontal cortex into lower limbic and midbrain regions. And what happens when we dissociate is we lose contact with the present moment right here. And we can drift into sort of a dreamland, into the past, into the future, into some sort of other fantasy realm. So as we dissociate out of the present moment, that removes our inhibitions, which then leads to binge eating. So some of the studies they looked at have made a really clear connection between the negative emotional states, the dissociation, inhibition, and then binge eating. The level of dissociation that a person experiences is intricately tied to the intensity of the binge eating episode. So higher levels of dissociation leads to higher levels of binging. Depression is also consistently associated with obesity, and the thought is perhaps this is connected to emotional eating. So when people are feeling depressed, they eat emotionally to soothe their feelings, and perhaps that is the connection between body fat and trauma, or one of the mediating factors anyways. We'll also look at this activation of the stress response, and this is sort of ties into the HPA axis stuff also. So the activation of the stress response leads to emotional dysregulation, that feeling when it just feels like everything's just not okay. And when a person is feeling emotionally dysregulated, it's been shown that they have a preference for foods that are higher in sugar and fat. And then we'll look at some nutritional research in other videos, but it seems to be pretty clear that when a person is eating foods that are high in sugar and fat, that's one of the things that can lead to higher amounts of body fat for that person. So that's all we have for this video. I really hope that you learned something or that it's added to your life in some way. I'm gonna keep coming out with content like this, all different types of fields and studies, but it's all going to relate to empowerment of our own health and feeling really good and happy and strong on this planet. So hit that thumbs up button, that like button, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. All these things boost my visibility in the YouTube algorithms. So it's really helpful for me in the channel if you do those. And I hope you have a great day. We'll see you next time. Peace.